Hello, my name is Sarah-Louise Ruder. I'd like to present a quick overview of data policy in Canada to support a webinar series called Ethical Data Governance in Agriculture, co-organized by the BC Agricultural Climate Action Research Network and researchers at the University of British Columbia. More specifically, this serves as a primer for the workshop coming up on May 24th, Agricultural Data Governance in Canada. So let's put this conversation in context. In Canada, there are two main categories of policies that direct agricultural data management and communicate those terms to farmers and farm workers: government policy and corporate policy. Let's start with government policy. In Canada, at the federal level, there are two main pieces of legislation that pertain to data: the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, also known by its acronym PIPEDA, and the Privacy Act. Both pieces of legislation pertain to a specific kind of data: personal information. In the legislation, personal information is defined as any recorded information about an identifiable individual. This includes things like our age, race, ethnicity, religion, marital status, and other things that you might find personal to share. PIPEDA outlines the expectations for the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information by private actors and companies, whereas the Privacy Act outlines the expectations of handling personal information by the federal government. Importantly, the Privacy Act also outlines the mechanisms through which a person can request access to information about themselves that is currently held in a government office. I'll also mention that the provinces and territories have additional laws about data governance, often connecting freedom of information and privacy protection in one piece of legislation. It's an interesting time to be talking about data governance in Canada. The federal government is currently experiencing a potential wave of legislative reform. PIPEDA and the Privacy Act are over 20 years old, and so in June of 2022, Bill C-27 was tabled for its first reading and proposed 3 new statutes to either update or repeal some of the policies I've mentioned so far. The same month, there was also Bill C-26, tabled for its first reading, focusing on cybersecurity and changes to the Telecommunications Act. Now let's talk about corporate policy. According to PIPEDA, any corporate entity or business that collects personal information needs to have a privacy policy or some similar document that explains the terms for the data collection, storage, use, and so on, and communicates that to the relevant parties. For example, farm management platforms have their own corporate data policies. There are often multiple documents or policies that pertain to personal and agricultural data for farm management platforms. Sometimes these are called terms of service or use, and often a privacy statement. In summary, government policy about data in Canada focuses primarily on personal information. Now, sometimes agricultural data counts as personal information because it would make an individual person identifiable, but not always. And what about all the data in agriculture that is not personal? There's currently no sector-specific law for agricultural data governance in Canada, and I view this as a problem. All actors that collect personal data and engage in commercial activity have a legal requirement to communicate the terms under which they are interacting with the data. This is what we looked at with the corporate policies for farm management applications. But even when they meet the legal requirements, we really need to read between the lines to understand what they can and cannot do with agricultural data. And even with the most exhaustive policies, there are some questions that remain unanswered. This presents governance challenges for the ownership and control of our data for farmers, as well as some challenges around how it can be used and shared, and for whose benefit. Come join the webinar on May 24th, Agricultural Data Governance in Canada, where we'll hear from experts Lise Legendre and Kelly Bronson, with Serena Black as a moderator.